Hi there. It's Tuesday, another Tuesday morning at 11. Well, it's 10 till 11, so maybe I shouldn't have started quite so early. That's okay. I'm here. This is CSE Cooney for our Dark Breakers read along. And you'll notice a new background. It is the breaker gate for it's the gate of Breaker House, the breakers. The breakers in Rhode Island, in Newport, Rhode Island, but also Breaker House, Dark Breakers, Day Breakers, Breakers Beyond in Dark Breakers, which does not take place in Rhode Island. It takes place in Seafall, which is like Newport, Rhode Island, only not on this world where there isn't Rhode Island. There are the Federation Islands, however. It's very, very similar. But my friend Beck, Rebecca Houston, did these wonderful gates. When I initially self published The Breaker Queen and The Two Poppers, which is the second novella in Dark Breakers, she did the covers, so she made this breaker gate, and then I used art that was in the public domain and sort of cobbled together covers, because that's what you do when you're self-publishing. At least back in the day, that's what we did. I think there's a lot more slick ways to do it these days. But after that, I started publishing a little bit more traditionally. Anyway, I learned from my wonderful friend Phoebe, who is a artist herself. She caught that our cozy tavern background was probably AI generated, so I went back to that Etsy site where we got it. We got the whole kind of layout, and it's that sort of thing where if it's too good to be true, it probably is, but I just didn't think of it. And at the very, very bottom of about this piece of art, where you have to like say see more and scroll down, and the tiniest writing was, it was AI generated and then animated by the artist. So anyway, I cannot ethically use that background because I know too many artists, and I don't want anybody's art scraped to feed LLMs, and I don't want my work scraped to feed LLMs. Too late. So anyway, I'm so happy to have Beck's art. I've been collaborating with Beck since my 20s. She's a tattoo artist in Chicago at a place called Heathen Ink. Rebecca Houston is her full name, an amazing artist. Carlos saw some of her pen and ink drawings for Inktober, and he instantly wanted to work with her. So for when we were creating our game Infernal Bargains, we contacted Beck and collaborated with her, and she's the one who made the deck, the Baraja del Destino, the Destino deck, the Oracle deck that is the main mechanic of the entire game in Negocios Infernales, and the deck that we use when we do our Infernal Salons, which is we give writers and artists and musicians a prompt of 3 of these gorgeous cards she made. We set a timer for 20 minutes. Everybody creates something in this ecstasy of ekphrasis, and then we all share. So those are super fun. So Beck is an enormous influence on my life. Enormous. And her art is just chef's kiss. And so here we are with the gate. And this will be our Dark Breakers background. My wonderful friend Phoebe mentioned that she might like to paint a cozy tavern background, and I thought, well, heck yes, if I had even thought about it, I should have just done that to begin with, So I will be in conversation with her and see how much glorious ducats I can shower upon her head for the coziest tavern background created by an actual living human being with fire in her fingertips and ardor in her heart. That's my speech. That's my soapbox, and I'm gonna stand on it. So now we are in chapter 9, Heir Presumptive of Dark Breakers. In the last few chapters, our darling Elliot Howell, who is an art professor, had walked through the walls of Breaker House, or as the gentry of the Valwo called it, Day Breakers, because there's only one of the Breaker houses that exist sort of piled on top of each other in different dimensions. He walked through the walls of Daybreakers at midnight when the walls open into the next world down, which is the Valwode, the veil between worlds. And the queen of the Valwode, Nyx the Nightwalker, is awaiting him. She took a fancy to him, a shine, and she sort of lured him down, and he went willingly. So it was all consensual. They flirted for a while. Nyx starts to feel a very specific and alarming sort of feeling, which gentry get when they're around humans, which is they get extra wild, extra capricious. Humans make them feel giddy. That's kind of like being drunk or on drugs, because humans are mortal. And so the immortal gentry start kind of like getting high on that mortality. They're almost like learning how to be mortal, which makes everything super bright and super fast, and the sensation of impending death, that fey feeling, which they would probably call that mortal feeling. So they're getting all hot and heavy, teasing, flirting, that sort of thing. Nyx is trying to get a hold of herself. She's thousands of years old, and she knows better than this. Elliot just doesn't care anymore. He just wants Nyx, who could blame him, really? And then they get interrupted. Not quite coitus interruptus, but pretty close. And the heir presumptive of Darkbreakers, that's the Breaker House in the Volwood, her name is Sasura the Night Hag, and she's Nyx's heir. She's a goblin girl from the next world down, Bana, the Bone Kingdom. She's the daughter of Nyx's brother, who's the Kobold King, the king of the goblins. And she's been machinating and scheming, like goblin girls do. And Nyx has let it go on to a point. Like, she thinks that that's good practice, if you're going to be in politics. But Sasura has gone a bit too far. She's starting trying to take bits of the Volwood away from Nyx, and Nyx just is like, nope, I'm still the queen of the Volwood, man. So that's where we're at. We're at the confrontation between the queen and her heir, with poor mortal Elliot caught in between. A dangerous place for a mortal boy to be, or as they later become known in like the equivalent of the 1980s of this world, a mobo. But we haven't gotten to that book yet. That's a book I'm still writing called Fiddle. Anyway, hello, happy morning, Chapter 9, Heir Presumptive. Niece? Auntie? That voice. Syrup over scythes, an indolent gentry drawl overlaying the innate goblin gutturals. Impossible to ignore it, one of the many reasons Nyx had chosen the girl for her heir. Nyx slammed back down to the flats of her feet and turned around in Elliot's arms. He kept holding her, a light hold, but an active one, ready at a moment's notice to thrust her behind him and protect her with his body. Laughable, but dear. I did not call thee to my bower, she said. Avaunt! Sasura laughed like a manticore scraping a mulberry tree. Oh, don't avaunt me, auntie. I might just avaunt myself back down to Bana and tell Da you banished me for good, his own daughter, and then where would we be? She cocked her thin, silvery face at Elliot and smiled with all her pointed teeth. Sasura of the Night Hags, she introduced herself. Hatch, Ladracatus, 12th of my sack, and you are? Her impudence struck Nyx speechless. To enter her bower uninvited, to speak to her guest before an introduction was offered, and while Nyx was naked. A snap of thought, and the Breaker Queen robed herself in scarlet petals, each velvety leaf overlapping like fish scales. The garment swept from shoulder to floor and puddled around her feet like a pool of blood and roses. Silver vines with silver thorns twined up her bare wrists and arms, encircled her throat, bound back her braids, and draped her face in a veil of barbed chains. A silver scepter appeared in her hand, spiked on one end like a morning star. Lastly, the antler crown burst from her skull. It was always there, on the inside, but over her long reign she had learned to conceal it. The raging tangle of tears was so tall it reached higher than the unruliest cowlick of Elliot Howell's hair. She heard the boy catch his breath, but did not turn her attention from her heir presumptive, who brought her hands together and applauded Nyx's transformation with a rain-like pitter-patter of talons clicking talons. Widening her nightshade purple eyes and batting her lunamoth eyelashes, Sasura exclaimed, Forgive my intrusion, Auntie Majesty. It's only I awoke from the strangest dream just now. I dreamed that you were here at Darkbreakers, all alone. Your loyal courtiers had abandoned you. Your impsy knights have all been lured away on impossible quests. All your royal enchanters have gone renegado and surrounded your palace on all sides with fell spells ready to unleash them at the word of their commander. And then waking from my dream, my nightmare, to the sound of bone bells ringing, I came to find you. You were gone so long to 8th by our measures that I thought you might never return. But here you are, with a mortal boy, and one who is so very large. She grinned up at Elliot. She had a mouth like a cobra lily, greenish-purple and carnivorously attractive. Her barracuda teeth were very clean and very white. "So large," she repeated, "and shaggy, and 7 fire-fanged hells, Auntie, positively strapping, bursting with virility. I could not bear to think of you here, all alone, unprotected in the echoing halls of your empty palace, vulnerable to his brutish impulses. He might overpower you." Nyx glanced at Eliot and kept her voice light, her temper tightly leashed. "Yes, I do believe that was the entire point of the exercise. What else should I want him for?" Sisera loosed a skittering giggle, wasps landing on water. "But, Auntie, I cannot allow it." Nyx was only half listening. With the rest of her mind, she was sinking into the dream of dark breakers. Quiet, yes, deathly quiet. She had been so enraptured with Eliot Howell when first she had arrived home, she had not noticed this unusual stillness. All the while she was sojourning in Eighth, a single day, just one day to herself, to gather her strength, Sisera had dreamed dark breakers empty of all Nyx's allies. But her air was not quite strong enough to dream dark breakers as her own. The palace itself still answered to Nyx's mind. Even now its walls trembled in umbrage at Sisera's onslaught of avaricious thought. Nyx cast her mind out further still, testing the strength of Sisera's preparations. Yes, her impsy knights were in full questing thrall, galloping or winging or swimming or burrowing their heart-strong, unheeding ways to the furthest reaches of the Volwoad. Too far away to come to Nyx's aid? Her friends were all imprisoned, or driven off, or fled, turned cowards in the face of Sisera's power. Her usual detractors, wooed over to treachery by the dreamer's air, were full-on traitors now, and indeed ringed the palace grounds, ready to attack. All in a day's work. A day, on Eighth, but in the Volwoad, Sisera had had all the time she imagined. Nyx had expected something like this, but not so quickly. Not so soon, not now. "Thou goblin whelp," she said softly, "methinks thou meritest some chastisement. Thou hast contrived a most precipitous stratagem, but thou shalt come in time to value stillness." "Stillness is for the old, Auntie, for the frail and weak," Sisera retorted. "I am surprised you acted with as much energy as you did, to engage with such urgent vitality at your age." She gave Eliot another admiring look. He did not return it. Nyx could see him standing behind her, reflected in the liquid mirrors of the walls. His arms encircled her, taut as wires. His eyes were carefully downcast, his face drawn in confusion. He was listening to everything that passed between Nyx and her heir, straining to hear the words beneath the words, to understand the undercurrents. Poor boy. He did not know why Nyx had brought him to Dark Breakers. He had assumed all was as it seemed. A lover's tryst, a private rip between worlds. She had not thought to prepare him. And what good would it have done, after all? Should not Nyx the Nightwalker, Breaker Queen, ruler of the Volwoad, be capable of protecting one mere mortal boy, even as she weaponized him? Nyx's eyes narrowed as her niece's hand unfurled from the silken cobwebs of her sleeve. Each of her 5-jointed fingers was willow wand long. The scimitars of her nails were lacquered purple and filigreed in a copper lace as delicate as slug trails. Sisera raised her palm to cup her chin. Her fingertips tapped the top of her head. Her shiny black hair legs stirred and clackered at the caress. "What?" she asked Nyx. "Did you think at your age to get yourself with child, to replace me? Auntie, you are far more likely to hurt yourself." She shook her head in mock disapproval. "I fear it is all too much for you." Now she stopped in front of Nyx, close enough that her breath stirred the silver chains on Nyx's face. But now Eliot did move and set Nyx behind him. Nyx took that moment of movement and distraction to plunge her consciousness recklessly down into the heart of Dark Breakers. Down, down, and then out into the Volwoad beyond. Eliot's back provided a necessary bulwark, a respite, but he would, she knew of necessity, take damage for it. Behind his mask, she heard Sisera confiding to Eliot, I know she doesn't look it, but Nyx the Nightwalker is extremely old. There is nothing our great Breaker Queen has not seen or done. Now you look as fresh as new-fruited fungus. You've the look of a lad who wants to be gnawed on. Never mind my auntie. She's nothing but gums and drool, wasting away on a diet of watered-down dreams. Take her to bed, and she'll go muttering off to sleep before she's even stripped you to bone. And then she did something that made Eliot cry out sharply. Nyx was plunged too deep, spread too wide to react right away. She was sounding the shallows of the veil between worlds. She was flinging herself into its relentless undertow. She was re-establishing her dreaming bonds with all currents of power flowing out into the Volwoad from its nexus at Darkbreakers. And, at the sound of Sisera's delighted laugh, the dreamer called that power back in. Her niece was right about one thing. Nyx was old. She had been dreaming since long before this 12th daughter of her brother broke as hatchling from her sack. She had forgotten more dreams than Sisera could begin to imagine. And now all of those dreams, all of her oldest enchantments, she reversed in their countless torrents and diverted them back into her own being, the whirlpool whence they sprang. The splashback filled her. Nyx's eyes snapped wide. She looked about and met Eliot's frantic gaze in the bright, fluid walls, right before he crashed to the floor and began seizing a black foam in his mouth. Sisera squatted over his body, cooling. Now Nyx saw what she had done. Deep scratches, welling with his blood in her ichor, raked Eliot's arms, his chest, his neck. Already the poison was working through him. Grinning with smug satisfaction, Sisera glanced up at Nyx and winked drolly, seeing how this new blow had struck her. Nyx's fingers closed around Sisera's throat. 1,000 dying mortals haunted these hands. 1,000 snapped necks, 1,000 hollow bells. Sisera's eyes bulged, her tongue lolled, her arms flailed, and her legs kicked. The silver-green skin of her face began to mottle, shading toward a darker viridian. Ignoring all of this, the Breaker Queen lifted her niece into the air and flung her across the room. She flung her far and hard, away from Eliot. No great work, this. The goblin girl, full of arrogance and folly, had never thought to imagine herself substantial. She was easily displaced, mere fume and suggestion, a tissue paper confection glued into form with twigs and cobwebs. Nyx was old, and cold, and ice, moonlight, a destroying wave. She advanced. Now clear of the bleeding mortal, my bleeding mortal, Nyx thought. She pounced upon Sisera again, lifted her again, just for the satisfaction of dashing her back down to the floor. But this time, the goblin girl landed more delicately, on fingertip and toe tip, a spider kiting on a gossamer thread. She was learning quickly. She seemed astonished at Nyx's violence, but not particularly hurt by it, and very soon the astonishment gave way to a more assessing look. Still some juice in the old husk yet, eh, Auntie? The Breaker Queen did not rise to the bait. Her voice very deep and very quiet. She said, Every insult which thy viperish tongue didst utter, every mark of thy malice upon him, every dream thou turnst against me, is one more bar on thy cage. At the hushed words, pikes by the dozen began to spear up from the floor to surround Sisera. They shot to the ceiling, quick as thought, each with a gleam of mercury, all clustered closer than pine saplings growing in a circle. Sisera sprang from her crouch, her silver skin flushed to burning jade. A choker of emerald-colored bruises ringed her throat, bearing the shape of Nyx's fingers. Nyx! Her voice was a monstrous rasp, as befitted a true beast of the Bone Kingdom. She rattled her bars. Loose me, or I will loose thine enemies upon thee. Fury lent the girl gravity. The bars even bent a little in her grip. Nyx nodded in approval. Yes, her little night hag was powerful, for all her wispy looks and sly, slithering ways. She had chosen well for her heir, and told her so. Or, rather, Nyx reviewed the compliment, I will have chosen well, Sura Laura, dwayberry of thy father's fond eye, eventually, tomorrow or in 1,000 years, as the oaken barrel ages the wine, so too shall thine own cage mature thee. Sisera's sharp teeth flashed in panic, but a coat of gentry syrup calmed her growl when next she spoke. Queen Nyx, Auntie Majesty Nixie, night-walking Nixie, Da's dear sister, you know very well that I, beneath-born as I am, have immunity here in the Valwold. If you would punish me, you must extradite me back to Breakers Beyond, where Da will mete out his own dark justice according to the laws of Bana. He would... She licked her lips nervously. Take my imprisonment in Darkbreakers as a great affront. Do not so lightly cast aside your ancient alliance with the Bone Kingdom. Do not be so quick to offend the beloved brother whom you raised from sack to flame. But release me at once, and I will never speak of it again. Iron, said Nyx succinctly. Even speaking the word was like regurgitating a broadsword. The sound cut her throat, split her tongue, shattered her teeth, but as quickly as Nyx dreamed the damage, she righted it. Sisera did not recover so quickly. She cowered back from the word, palms clapped over her sensitive ears. You wouldn't, she said, rasping once more. Nyx, you couldn't. Does my own niece, heir to the antler crown, and darling of my court, have no true notion of what I can and cannot do? Nyx wondered aloud. Poor pupil, how I have neglected thee. But I shall make amends. Iron. The second time she said the word, Sisera whimpered. Green blood dripped from between her fingers, leaking out from the ears she could not quite protect. Again the soft tissues of Nyx's throat felt grated and pulped. Again the thick taste of rust rushed over her tongue. She spat a stream of blood between the bars. She dreamed her blood bright red as Eliot's, as begrammed with iron. It splattered near Sisera's knees. Her niece huddled away from it, trembling on the floor, even as Eliot was trembling. Nonetheless, she maintained presence of mind enough to crawl around the spray and skitter forward, thrusting her forehead through the widest gap between two quicksilver pikes. Her long fingers triple-wrapped the shafts, all her knuckles standing out like studs on a flail. You cannot call that here. The Valwold cannot bear it. You would not survive it. Nothing would survive it. Nyx gave the slightest twitch of a shrug. True. It might just murder me to try. But then, she reasoned, to merely speak the word aloud would surely murder thee. Yet here I stand. Iron! And the third time she spoke it, the liquid gleam of Sisera's cage turned dull and gray. Sisera snatched back her hands from the iron bars, but not soon enough. Not before they began to blacken and bubble and burn. She fell to the floor with a sound like sandstone splitting. Sisera of the Night Hags, pronounced the Breaker Queen, for contempt of queen and kin, for maltreating a guest at her table, for trespass of thought and wilful acts of treason, thou shalt endure this imprisonment. No audience shall be granted thee, no remission, no parole. Thou'rt young yet, my niece, well. And so, ripen then, forgotten in some lost pocket of dark breakers, till a creature more desperate than thee discovers thy hidden cage in her hour of need. Go with my blessing, if not my blessed scion horn. May this period of enforced seclusion grant thee wisdom enow to know. Nyx leaned in and hissed, Never harm that which is mine. No, Sisera whispered, please. Nyx flicked her fingers. Oubliette! No, Nyx, please, Nyx, no! The floor parted like two opposing waves. It swallowed Sisera, howling all the while, iron cage and all. That was chapter 9. We'll go to chapter 10 after a few minutes break. I realized I don't have my actual nice mic with me. What a thing. I hope it sounded okay, and if not, the next chapter will sound a little better. All right, see you in a few minutes. Bye-bye.